We have often heard it said, municipal government is the level that's closest to the people. Does that make our cities uniquely placed to do something about climate change? Former Toronto Mayor David Miller has devoted most of his post-political career engaged at the global level with such questions. He discusses it in his new book called Solved: How the World's Great Cities Are Fixing the Climate Crisis. He is Director of International Diplomacy at C40 Cities Climate Leadership Group. And David Miller joins us now from the High Park area of Ontario's capital city. And your worship, it's good to have you on our airwaves again. How you doing?
Thanks very much, Steve. It's obviously very strange times for everyone, but my family and I are holding up pretty well. Appreciate being on the show.
Glad to hear that. I do want to start with your rather provocative title, which you acknowledge in the epilogue is a bit cheeky to put out there. But when we keep hearing every day about how if we don't do this and if we don't do that, we're going to lose the world because of climate change, and you entitle a book about climate change Solved with a check mark through the O, it does make me prick up my eyebrows. So what are you getting at there?
Well, what I'm getting at is most of the world's carbon emissions are in cities. And amongst the biggest cities of the world, there are real solutions happening today, not waiting for new inventions, but actually happening today, that if we did at scale quickly across most cities, we would get the world back on path by 2030 to do what's necessary. So from that perspective, the solutions are there. We just need to do them. And that's why I said the crisis can be solved in cities, because those solutions are there. They're real, they're affordable, they're not imaginary, they're not waiting for something to be invented. We just need to do much, much more of it very quickly.
Somebody noted many months ago that if you look in the skies of the big cities all around the world, they were certainly much cleaner when we were all sort of confined to quarters during the early part of this pandemic. Now, you know, nobody wants to say thank goodness for the pandemic because it brought us cleaner skies, but clearly there seemed to be a path forward there if we could adopt on a more permanent basis some of the things that we seem to have figured out in the short run. What would it take to keep the good things about the last 7 months with us going forward that would be helpful to the environment?
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. I mean, the pandemic has been a terrible loss of life and extremely difficult economically. But we've also seen some really rapid actions from a lot of cities, Ontario cities and cities globally, to address underlying environmental issues and also social issues, which have become so apparent. So from my perspective, the first thing it would take to build on what we've seen works in response to this global crisis is leadership. Secondly, some money. And I think if you combine those two things, and by leadership, I mean following the example of some of the best cities in the world, you could make some really rapid strides, not just to address climate change, but also to make our cities better places to live.
Well, let's name names. Who do you like in terms of leadership and in what cities?
Well, I think what we've seen in Lisbon, Portugal, for example, Mayor Medina, is quite remarkable. What they've essentially done is say, from an environmental perspective and from a social perspective, the pandemic has showed us that housing is very unaffordable. People in low-income jobs often have to live outside of the city. And we've, of course, seen that the air is much cleaner when everybody's not driving to work. So they have repurposed short-term rental housing, i.e. Airbnb, as long-term rental housing, and the government subsidizing it to make it affordable for low-income people to actually move back in the city. That's a tremendous change, responding to a challenge that all North American cities certainly are facing, of affordable housing while having huge environmental benefits. We've seen Medellin in Colombia actually starting to build new rapid transit as a response to the pandemic, which is a little bit counterintuitive because we see transit ridership dropping. But in fact, if you want to ensure that public transit is safe, you need more of it, not less. And they're showing the way by leading on that. And then we've seen a whole range of cities understanding that as white-collar workers work from home, you need to think of the city as a much more neighborhood-based place. And there's this idea of the 15-minute city, ensuring that people can walk and cycle and have the services they need in their neighborhood. And a whole range of cities have repurposed roads in favor of active transportation, people walking and cycling. All of those things and much more are happening at a speed we've never thought possible. But because they're necessary to respond to the pandemic, mayors have been able to do them very quickly.
Any mayors of any Ontario cities that are catching your fancy?
Well, I think, this is a really tough moment for mayors, and I applaud Mayor Watson, Mayor Eisenberger, and our own mayor in Toronto, Mayor Tory, for their efforts so far, just to respond. But I think what we need to think in Ontario at the moment is, what can we do next to take the stimulus money that's going to happen, steer the federal and provincial governments to make investments that will ensure that we don't just deal with the pandemic, that we deal with the climate crisis as well, because there's no point in fixing one problem to create another one. So we really need to see investments in the areas that are going to produce better places to live and also reduce greenhouse gases. And the good news is that in cities, we know what those areas are, very clear what they are, and it's clear somewhere in the world what can be done to address both problems of the environment and inequity.
I know you said this in the book, that you get asked this all the time, and so I kind of don't want to ask it on the one hand because you're expecting it. On the other hand, I don't want to disappoint you by not asking it because you are expecting it. But, okay, here we go. Everyone assumes that because the issue is climate change, that it requires countries, if not international institutions, to get together to solve this. And at first blush, you might not think the solutions are at the local level. And obviously, this book is designed to refute that argument. But what do you say to people who think, we can't do anything on a smaller scale? This has surely got to be the bigger players who are going to resolve this thing.
Well, what I say to people is, the good news is you're wrong, which probably isn't the best way to put it. But the good news is that not only are there real solutions in cities, in a way they have to come from cities. Studies by the C40 Cities Climate Leadership Group, who I work with at the moment, show that about 70% of the world's greenhouse gases can be attributed to cities. And those are in 4 areas, really. How we heat and cool our buildings, transportation, how we manage our waste, and how we generate our electricity. The good news in Ontario is that our electricity grid is mostly clean thanks to the efforts of the previous government. So that's good in this province. But in cities, you have a wonderful combination of having the powers to address transportation, how we heat and cool buildings, how we manage our waste. Some great examples globally of how to do it. And also kind of what I would see as a bit of magic. Cities in Ontario and towns have directly elected councils and mayor. There are also places where institutionally the governments are used to working with people and listening to them, not just because it's a habit, because legally they have to. For example, when you're doing development applications, there's a really structural process of engaging with citizens. And most people want action on climate change. So you've got this magic combination of possibilities to act within those areas, within legal responsibilities, and also able to influence other actors like other governments and also business and others. And secondly, this willingness and ability to work directly with people. And at a time when people increasingly want action on climate change, that means city governments are empowered by their residents, plus they have the tools. And that combination is unique. It's very different than federal and provincial governments, who can make policies but are much less direct and don't have responsibility for action the same way city governments do. City governments have to act. They can't just talk, they have to act, and people expect that.
Let's do a quote from the book here. You say, by replicating the best and most effective ideas already implemented in at least one city, and by doing so at a scale and pace internationally, we can make a significant leap forward, mitigating greenhouse gas emissions and put the world on a path to 1.5 degrees. Now, that 1.5 degrees is a reference to what?
1.5 degrees is a reference to what science shows is necessary to keep global heating below. So people probably remember 5 years ago, the nations of the world got together in Paris and reached agreement. What they said in that agreement was, we absolutely must keep global heating below 2 degrees. But our higher ambition, which Canada led the charge for this, by the way, is 1.5 degrees. Become clearer since then that science requires us to keep global heating within 1.5 degrees. And what that means practically is basically the greenhouse gas emissions of the world have to be cut by 50% by 2030. It's a huge amount, 50%, on a path to carbon neutral by 2050. More or less, that's what science says we need to do, and that's the basis of the book, is science.
Let's look at some of those buckets, those 4 buckets that you talked about earlier, transportation being one of them. And I note that a year ago or so, the Ontario government announced that it was going to unveil I think it was $28.5 billion public transit infrastructure build. Do I infer from that that you're happy and on side with that move?
Well, I think building any public transit's very good, but what the best cities show are a few things. First of all, cities need a network of public transit, not just a line or two. So in Toronto's case, there's been a debate about whether we should have subways or use the money for other things. I think the key is to build a network. Ottawa's done this very well through bus rapid transit. We've seen bus rapid transit in Curitiba, for example. We've seen light rail transit, which some of Toronto's proposals consist of. Certainly the plan when I was in office was to have an entire network of light rail transit, which means at grade, so it's much less expensive than building a subway, and you can build much more of it. That's important because people need an alternative that's reliable no matter where they go if they're going to get out of their cars and use transit. So that's really important. Secondly, it needs to be electric-based, particularly in places like Ontario that have a clean grid. You need to move public transport from diesel or gas to electric. So you move people out of cars onto public transport, electrify it, and that brings up the issue of buses. So Toronto right now is testing 60 electric buses. It's a pilot project to make sure the batteries work in our climate. While we're doing that, and while we've been discussing it over the past several years, Shenzhen, China, has electrified its entire bus fleet, which is about 16,000 buses, and they've used that process to create a whole new industry. They're the world's leading manufacturer of electric buses is in Shenzhen, China. And by the way, transportation is not just about public transport, it's also about private. So in Shenzhen, their taxi fleet is either electric or, if it isn't quite there yet, it's on its way to being all electric. And these are things to think about from a city perspective. You know, our fleets, Canada Post fleet, Purelator, other couriers, are they clean and electric? And the answer at the moment is no, they can be. You know, New York City's own fleet of vehicles has something like 12,000 electric vehicles in its fleet. That is possible today. So what we need to see is, first of all, public transit network built rapidly. We need to see that be electrified. And then we need to see other vehicles, starting with fleets, because they're the easiest. You can charge them centrally, move rapidly to electric. That's all possible on today's technology. And once you start doing that, you would have the impact, particularly when the charging facilities are built, of making it much easier for private vehicle owners to either take transit, walk or cycle, or move to electric if they still need to drive.
What about so-called active transportation, cycling, walking? What cities in the world are doing this well, and what can we learn from them?
Well, I think the big lesson is if you build a city in a way that doesn't force people to drive, so think about New York or Berlin or the core of Toronto for that matter, or a lot of Ottawa is built in a way that you don't have to drive, even though it's kind of spread out, as opposed to cities like Houston, where you're sort of virtually compelled to drive. People then have the choice not to drive, and people tend to take it. So active transportation is an important part of that. So as you think about a city growing in the future, coming out of the pandemic, one of the big needs that we've seen in the pandemic is affordable housing. So can you build affordable housing in a way it's neighborhood-based and allow people to walk or cycle to their daily needs, their work, buying food? You know, a lot of people have been forced to do it in the pandemic. We've seen cities really jump ahead. Paris, for example, under Mayor Hidalgo, is really aggressive in repurposing roads from cars for people walking and cycling. And they've been able to do much more of it in the pandemic because it's been essential because people have been working from home. That's a change combined with sort of future city planning, the thinking of how your city or town, this applies to any municipality, is going to grow in the next 5 or 10 years, that makes the city much more livable, makes health outcomes much better because walking and cycling promote good health, makes the air much cleaner, and creates economic success locally in neighborhoods. So it's a win for everybody. And what we've seen over the last year is tremendous strides in Toronto. They've built bike lanes over the past couple of months longer than they built in basically the last decade, very quickly, and they're packed. People love it. People are there because it's safe. They're reserved, protected bike lanes right across the east-west artery of Toronto. I rode them on Sunday between Bloor and Danforth. It's fantastic. That kind of thing has really positive spin-offs in a lot of different ways, and of course provides an easy way for people to transport themselves around a city without polluting.
Let's look at a second of those 4 buckets that you talked about earlier, this time waste disposal. We seem to be a very disposable society. Buy single-use plastic stuff, throw it out right away. You tell us in the book San Francisco leads the way in doing something about this. What are they doing?
Well, what San Francisco did is first of all, get way ahead of everybody else, ensuring that you had basically what we have as a green bin program, blue box. So recycling. The composting is critical from a climate change perspective, because if you allowed food to decompose in a landfill, methane will escape to the atmosphere. It's extremely bad from a climate change perspective. They've also restricted very significantly single-use products, including single-use plastics. So that's the state of the art today. Ontario, we should be proud of where we are in Ontario. We were early advocates of recycling with the blue box. Toronto was an early advocate of the green bin, as were places like Guelph and Halifax, for that matter, been well ahead of the curve. The next step, and this is a place that's more advanced, it's not as off the shelf, is trying to think about our economy in a more circular economy way. And we're seeing some cities like Portland, Oregon, and Philadelphia create some pilot projects, particularly around food. And Steve, people will see me as the former mayor of Toronto. I grew up in a small English village and emigrated to Canada when I was 8, just turning 9. And our village, everybody had a little garden, and we all had a compost heap. We grew our own vegetables, and we ate them when they were fresh, and they were fantastic. I can still taste fresh potatoes out of my grandfather's garden with fresh mint. They were just wonderful. And that kind of circularity is something we've gotten away from. We've become much too disposable. So San Francisco is state of the art today. Ontario, I think we should be pleased that we're kind of a B plus, but we need to get to an A and dramatically reduce the waste we produce in the first place. I've been to public meetings where people have ranted about all the unnecessary packaging. Well, that's the kind of thing. It truly is unnecessary. And we need to move away from that as a society. And I think that's going to take government leadership. The same way that we saw pesticide bans move from Hudson, Quebec to Toronto and then across Ontario, we need to see some experimental ideas about minimizing and eliminating unnecessary packaging and other waste and moving much more towards circularity. I think that's the state of the art. And if we want to save the planet in a variety of ways, including stopping big islands of plastic from being in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, we need to move there and move there pretty quickly.
I do want to follow up on that, rather lovely childhood memory of yours. We live in a capital city here where I think half the people live in either condos or apartments. Are you saying that they can grow their own vegetables?
Absolutely, actually. It's not just allotments. There's lots that can be done on balconies, particularly small tomato plants. And perhaps it sounds odd given the gravity of climate change, but if we do need to think about changing the way we consume and the way our economy works in a way that supports people. Quezon City, as a result of the pandemic, their biggest concern was getting enough food to people. So they repurposed industrial land in the middle of the city and for food. And it's not just people on balconies. Not everybody, can have a big enough place to grow some food, but you can grow food in the city. Montreal is doing it, Brooklyn in New York, There's very significant warehouses with hydroponics. So we can change our systems quite significantly based on what's happening somewhere. And again, this is the gift of the cities. They're experimental. They have interesting ideas. Once cities see that they work, they spread like rapid fire. An idea is the rental bikes. That basically started this idea of the previous mayor of Paris. The mayor of Montreal saw it, decided that their parking authority would actually manufacture bikes. And bikes manufactured by the Montreal Parking Authority then spread to New York and London, England, and elsewhere. And now they're all over the world. And that started because a good idea in one city took place. And that's the gift of what happens with city governments. And the interesting thing is it applies to big cities, medium cities, and small towns as well. You can make better buildings. You can make cleaner transportation. You can make less waste or find ways to create a more circular economy in a small town as well as a big city. And you just need to look to the ideas and do them.
With just a couple of minutes to go here, I want to ask you about what politics allows to be possible on all of these issues that we've been talking about. When you don't have the kinds of time in office like a Vladimir Putin or a Lukashenko in Belarus does, when we have in the Democratic West elections, which replace politicians on a fairly regular basis, can you have the kind of sustained political leadership in place that can get you to the finish line that you'd like to see? I take your point about the Chinese doing all the wonderful things they're doing. They're an authoritarian dictatorship. The guy who's in charge there has been for a decade, will be for another decade. It's kind of easy when you're the king forever, isn't it?
Well, I mean, yes to China, but the fact that they have electrified their transportation fleet in major cities in China should be a lesson to us of what's possible. And I think to your broader point, Steve, there's no question that that's a big issue. And to me, it actually comes back to us as voters in the end. But cities are positioned very well to have a continuity of legacy. And I think ultimately, if we as voters pay attention, when I brought a climate change plan to city council, it passed unanimously. And that doesn't happen in a democratic system in a city council unless people are speaking up and saying, we want you to address this issue, because otherwise somebody somewhere would oppose it, one of the councillors. And I think, so if people continue to speak up and care about environmental issues, we're going to see a continuity of policies. When I left office, quite famously, Premier McGuinty stopped one LRT line and my successor in office stopped another one. But you know what? The third one, the Eglinton LRT, is still underway. The one that Premier McGuinty stopped is likely to get built. The other one may be. It's still happening. Why? First of all, because it was based on facts. Secondly, because there's a need. Thirdly, because people in Toronto recognize that they want better transportation. It gets expressed a bit differently, and we've seen different plans, but people are pushing and pushing. And the institutions of city government support some continuity because they engage people regularly through their systems, as I mentioned earlier. And I think that gives us a hope. Nothing's perfect, but if people speak up, the institutions of cities are reasonably likely to keep good plans going. And if they weren't good plans, they shouldn't be kept going in the first place. So I think there's a real chance. And I'm hoping if people learn what's happening in many cities around the world from my book and other sources, they'll say to their city government and their town government, we want more of this. We want to live in a place that's contributing to solving the problem of climate change because we know we can. And that makes us, as a resident of this city, happy. And that'll make us vote for you for re-election.
That's the 63rd Mayor of Ontario's capital city, David Miller, whose latest entry into this field is called Solved: How the World's Great Cities Are Fixing the Climate Crisis. David Miller, it's always great to have you on TVO. You give us lots to think about. We really appreciate your time. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me on, Steve. Bye-bye.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.